Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Help for HDTV. Today, we have Hank from Prilenia with us, and we just a couple weeks ago held our symposium in Washington, D.C., and Prilenia gave a wonderful presentation, but we had technical difficulties. Technology, you never know. It gave us a little bit of a hard time. So we promised you guys on social media when you said you couldn't hear it and you were trying to listen to this presentation that we would record it and get it to you. So Hank said he absolutely would do this for us. So we are so thankful. So I will let Katrina do a short bio and intro, and then I will let Hank run the presentation for Prilenia for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Hank Schuring is a senior executive with over 30 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Hank is a pharmacist with a proven track record in rare diseases and as a creative strategic thinker. He has worked on several first treatments in rare diseases and has been working in industry at various positions and regulatory affairs and commercial at both regional and global levels. In his role at Prilenia, he plays a critical role in defining the regulatory pathway for marketing authorization, development, and clinical programs. And we are so glad that you're here and that you are willing to redo your presentation for everyone who is watching today. We'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and you're sharing your screen. So that's perfect. Slides look great, and we'll let you take it from there.
Thank you so much, Katie and Katrina. It's always a pleasure to speak to Help for HD and their base of people. And when you asked if I would redo it and make it something that people could hear and understand, I always immediately support that, because that's in the end what we do this for. As you heard, I'm Hank Schuring. I'm currently Chief Regulatory and Commercialization Officer at Prilenia. And as such, I'm an employee of Prilenia, and I have to mention that pridopidine is to date an investigational therapy in development for Huntington's disease and ALS, and amongst other neurodegenerative diseases, currently not approved by any regulatory agency, and that this information is for this presentation is for information purposes. And of course, it is never a substitute for any professional medical advice from your doctor or healthcare professional. So let's talk a little bit about Prilenia. What is Prilenia? Prilenia is a small company, about 40 people, who are dedicated to developing new treatments for the urgent needs facing people and their families, caregivers, for Huntington disease, ALS, and we are also looking at potentially in the future Rett disease, Fragile X, vanishing white matter, and other neurodegenerative neurodevelopmental disorders. I wanted to share a little bit of our values and our passion with you, as I think it is important to understand what drives us and how we work to understand what we are trying to achieve. We are a passionate group of people who are very much dedicated to finding a treatment for Huntington and ALS. However, in that context, we are driven by science. We need to understand the mechanisms of the disease as well as the drug pridopidine that we have in development. We care for people, and when we say care for people, that means for the people that work at Prilenia, but also those impacted by the disease. And that is not only the patients, but that is also the caregivers, the family, the whole wide community. We act with empathy, compassion, understanding, but also with a high sense of urgency, as we do believe there is a high need for treatments that have an impact on Huntington disease. Seth always reminds me that we should make it clear that we are trying to achieve the impossible and that we prefer that. And we have a can-do attitude. And what do I mean with a can-do attitude? I often hear people, and then in discussions, and when we propose something, we say, we cannot do that, we cannot do that. We don't work in that way. When somebody comes up with an idea, we don't say we cannot do, but we ask what they want to achieve and why that is needed, and then look for ways to get there. So we are trying to get things done, and in that doing things, we are striving for excellence. A little bit about pridopidine. Pridopidine is an investigational drug that is currently in clinical studies for both Huntington disease and ALS. It is a small capsule that is administered orally twice a day, one capsule in the morning and one in the evening. After administration, taking it orally, pridopidine binds specifically to a receptor that is also in your brain, and that is called the sigma-1 receptor. If you activate this receptor, it leads to neuroprotective properties that are beneficial potentially in diseases like Huntington and ALS. In the clinical trials conducted so far, pridopidine has shown a favorable safety profile comparable to placebo, and it has also shown that it may potentially decrease the rate of decline for function, motor, and cognition in Huntington disease. The longest patients have been on pridopidine in clinical studies and open label extension or expanded access is almost 7 years. That is the longest time point that we have analyzed to date. You have previously heard me speak about PROOF-HD. PROOF-HD was a pivotal clinical trial, a phase 3 trial that Prilenia conducted between, I would say, second half of 2020 to early 2023. It was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. We enrolled patients at 59 sites, both in North America and in Europe, and we in total enrolled 499 patients. Half of them, 250, went on pridopidine, the other half, 249, received placebo. The primary endpoint of this study was the change from baseline to week 65 for total functional capacity. We also looked at safety in the form of the incidence and severity of adverse events / serious adverse events, and the secondary endpoints included the change from baseline to week 65 in the composite UHDRS, which is including total functional capacity, looking at motor in the form of total motor score, looking at cognition in the form of single-digit modality testing, as well as the Stroop word reading. We had also pre-specified to look at those patients that were not treated with neuroleptics and chorea medications that we call antidopaminergics. The neuroleptics consist of the antipsychotics, and it is important to note that antidepressants are not included in this definition. After the double-blind phase, patients were eligible to enroll in an open-label extension, and about 97% of those eligible, 422 of the original 499, enrolled in the open-label extension. Just to remind you, the PROOF-HD study results showed that the primary and secondary endpoints were not met and showed no benefit with pridopidine in the full study population. However, as I mentioned, we had pre-specified to look at patients that were not receiving antidopaminergic drugs. And on the bottom right, you see examples of these antidopaminergic drugs, including VMAT inhibitors like tetrabenazine, also neuroleptic like risperidone, olanzapine, thiapride. In those patients that were not treated with these antidopaminergic drugs, we saw overall benefit on progression as measured by the composite UHDRS, on motor, on cognition, and quality of life. In this study, pridopidine was well tolerated with an adverse event rate comparable to placebo. And on the next slide here, I'm showing you how that works. We looked at treatment emerging adverse events, related adverse events, serious adverse events, and related serious adverse events. And you will appreciate that for both the placebo group as well as the pridopidine group, the numbers and the percentages are very similar, showing that the safety profile in the study was similar to placebo. As you may realize, we missed the primary endpoint, but then we showed the efficacy in the subgroup of patients not treated with antidopaminergic drugs. So we did a few steps. We first looked in the literature and in labels of products, and those confirmed that the effects of pridopidine can be masked by antidopaminergics. We also did some work by taking patients from Enroll-HD with the similar criteria as we used for patients that were eligible to participate in PROOF-HD, and again showed that those on antidopaminergics had worse outcomes on various assessments compared to those not on antidopaminergics. This does not mean that there is a difference in disease. This is more that these drugs impact the assessment. And let me try to explain. If you use an antidopaminergic in the form of a neuroleptic, you will often see there is a yellow sticker on the medication saying do not drive or use with heavy machines, because it impacts that function. And that is exactly what happens in these trials. We then decided to look at 4 double-blind placebo-controlled studies that we had conducted. And we pooled these and we looked at patients similar to those in PROOF-HD, and especially to those that did not use antidopaminergic drugs. We used the same patient population, the same dose, and a treatment duration of at least 12 weeks. This allowed us to get a much larger size of a population that we could look at, of around 200 patients per arm, 208 on pridopidine and 227 placebo. And when we looked at the data, it further supported what we had seen in PROOF-HD on the same endpoints and supported the effects overall on progression, on motor, cognition, and function. We are recently started to look at PROOF-HD open label extension study data. We haven't fully completed that, but I will share a few of those data on the next slide. Following this, we started talking to the European authorities as well as the FDA. The European authorities supported that we file what is called a marketing authorization application for pridopidine for the treatment of Huntington disease. A marketing authorization application is the European equivalent of what FDA would call a new drug application, or what in Canada is called a new drug submission, NDS. We filed in Europe in August of this year, and the product is currently under review. So let me share with you some data on a dossier, because when I use the word MAA, it sounds, just MAA. It doesn't live. This is a dossier that includes all the information that is needed to understand if a product is of the right quality, if it will be safe, and if it is efficacious. So it includes all the information on manufacturing, all the animal studies conducted, and the human studies. And in this particular case, the dossier is almost 500,000 pages. And 500,000 pages, when I say it, people look at me like, what is that? Well, if you think about 500 pages per binder, it's about 1,000 binders. Somebody in the Prilenia calculated also how high a stack of 500,000 pages would be. And it would be around 50 meters high. And if you would put them in a line attached to each other, it's close to be about 70-75 miles in length. Fortunately, we didn't have to print it. We just had to submit it electronically, and that was almost 6 gigabytes, and it consists close to 900 documents, and it has about close to 9,000 links in the dossier. And you will appreciate that the authorities will have to review all of these data. So what is a European marketing authorization application timeline? So in Europe, contrary to FDA, you will not get questions at every time point. You have a primary evaluation, which takes about 4 months, and then you get a list of questions. Then there will be a clock stop, which you see here from left to right, where you answer the questions, and then it will start with the secondary evaluation, which again leads to a list of questions and a clock stop, and then a final evaluation, which then leads to an opinion and decision. In calendar days, this can be about 277 days. If you really look to it with the clock stops, it typically takes about 12 to 14 months from the start to the finish. And this is basically a closed process. The European MAA is submitted to seek approval in all 27 European Union member states, as well as Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Once the CHMP provides an opinion, that has to be legally confirmed by the European Commission. Important, England or the United Kingdom is no longer part of the EU, but they do recognize a positive opinion from CHMP, and then we can use what is called an international recognition procedure, which leads to a potential faster approval in England. The other thing to keep in mind, which is very important in Europe, after an approval, it doesn't mean that the product is immediately available in all countries for patients. In almost all countries, there is a process which is called health technology assessment and pricing and reimbursement that needs to be followed before the product can be prescribed and can be made available to patients. Dependent on the country, this can take another 6 to 12 months. I'm very excited to share with you a few of the data from the Proof HD open label extension. This is very new, and we have recently started looking at this. What I wanted to show you here is that what we are seeing in the open label extension is a sustained benefit of pridopidine. In the open label extension, we were not able to continue looking at the placebo, as the placebo patients were also starting to receive pridopidine. That's why we are looking to a natural history cohort. And in this case, we used TRACK HD, a clinical trial, and we looked to matching patients with the same criteria as we are enrolling in Proof HD. On top, in purple, you see what happened first from left to right. Initially, you see the double-blind period, and then you see a dotted line when it was transitioned to the open label extension. What you see here is the patients that were receiving pridopidine in the double-blind phase, as well as in the open label extension, in the purple line on the top. In the green line below, you see the untreated patient matching from TRACK HD, and what you see is that the efficacy of pridopidine was sustained, and that the lines are even widening when you compare it to the natural history cohort. And we see this for multiple endpoints. So here you see the same for total functional capacity. I showed it previously for the composite UHDRS, and here you see for function, total functional capacity, a similar profile. In purple, the pridopidine treated patients in double-blind OLE, and in green, the matching, and you see again sustained effect of pridopidine and a widening in time versus the untreated. We can show the same if we look at cognition in the form of true word reading. And last but not least, we can also show this for Q motor as well. So in many cases, you see that we are showing a sustained effect from pridopidine in the open label extension versus untreated pridopidine patients, untreated placebo patients from TRACK HD. We are very excited on that. We will use that, and we will continue to further analyze the open label extension and share more data with you as they become available. And I would like to end with a big thank you to the HD community for their collaboration and their support to pridopidine and Prilenia, especially all study participants and their families, the site investigators and the staff, and of course the HD patient advocacy groups. Thank you.